Welcome to Memorizing Scripture. I'm your host, Gordon, and this week our memory verse is John 14:6. John 14:6. And again, what I mentioned yesterday in our podcast is that, yes, I'm in my truck, and I'm doing that because, yes, I do record all these at once, and the past week our family was sick. And so this is the time that I get to do that. I wasn't able to jump into the studio this week, but I wanted to keep going because I think it's important. And for those who are trying to memorize a verse a week with, like I'm trying to do, I just want to keep it moving forward and encourage us. So again, we're studying John 14:6. John 14:6. All right. So let's jump in. Here we go. And it says, Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Okay, so it's a simpler verse this week, and what I love about this verse is that it's so straightforward, but what we're going to do over the next day or so is jump a little bit more into the context of this verse than we normally have in some of our other memories verses in the past weeks. So first, we're just going to jump in and say, okay, this is in the Gospel of John. So the Apostle John is writing the Gospel of John. And early in my Christian walk, I don't know how many of you resonate with this, but I sometimes had trouble identifying John the Baptist, the Apostle John. Is there any other Johns in the Bible? Because it seems like a common name. But John the Baptist and the Apostle John are two different Johns, two different people. John the Baptist was beheaded early in Jesus' ministry. John the Apostle walked with Jesus, and he was the only apostle that wasn't martyred for his faith. And so he was one of the 12 disciples. And for those of you who don't know, there are four gospel accounts, four accounts of following Jesus through his ministry. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and this one is John. And so one of the major themes here that John writes about throughout his entire gospel is the perspective of Jesus as divine, as God. So Matthew will write his gospel with Jesus as king. Mark will write it as Jesus as more of a man, and from a man perspective. Luke writes Jesus as more as a servant. Luke writes it more as a man, and John writes it with the aspect of being God. And so there's different gospel, different purposes, different audiences. They all say the same thing, but as you're studying, you'll find these different nuances that help us really add more richness to studying the Gospels. And so this connection of thinking that the Gospel of John is writing about how Jesus is God. And so we learn in our memory verse, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Only a God can say that. And so it sets up our memory verse pretty well to understand that theme there. But if we go back to before our memory verse in chapter 13, we're going to start, and we know that this time of when Jesus is speaking this verse, our memory verse, it's in this context of the Lord's Supper. And if you have read chapter 13, you'll know that Jesus spoke on some pretty astonishing things during that meal, because right before that, the disciples and a lot of other Jewish people thought Jesus was going to come in and reign, but he didn't. He came into Jerusalem, and before he got crucified, no one was expecting that. He had the Passover meal with his disciples, and he said some of these things during the meal. He washed the disciples' feet, which was a job for the lowest servants. So for people to see that was something big. He said someone would betray him. We know that was Judas. He told the disciples, where I'm going, you can't come. And it was something he also told the Jews. And we see that in verse 33. So 13:33, he says, little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me. And just as I said to the Jews, now I also say to you, where you're going, you cannot come. Where I'm going, you cannot come. And then right after that, he gives them a new commandment to love one another, just like he had done before washing, or just as he had done when he was washing their feet. And he said, by all this, men will know you are my disciples. And then Peter pushes the point, hey, where are you going, Jesus? And Jesus says, where I am going, you cannot come, but later. And then Peter says, like, why not? Like, I'm going to give my life for you. And Jesus replies, truly, truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you have denied me 3 times. And so these are some pretty astonishing things for a group of men who sat there and thought, man, I thought you're going to come and save us. I thought you're going to save us from Rome, from this oppression that we have from Rome, from demon possession, from sickness, from the world's challenges. And the whole momentum of Jesus's ministry of casting out demons and healing and preaching, and all of a sudden it's coming to the head at this Passover at Jerusalem, and he just raised Lazarus from the dead just last week. And they were excited, and they thought, this was it. This is it. This is the time where Jesus is going to start his true reign. His reputation is huge. He's done all these amazing things. He's topped it off with raising this guy from the dead. And while that's all going on, the disciples are still murmuring to each other, what does my place look like in his kingdom? And this was something they must have discussed multiple times, but we see in Luke 22:24, he says, there was also a dispute among them to who was to be regarded the greatest. And so that is another reference to the Lord's Supper there, but it just shows that their minds were far from what was about to happen the next 24 hours. They were focused on their future, not Jesus's plan. And so with that thought, Jesus washed their feet, had this Passover meal, and they were probably still talking about who was going to be the greatest. And it probably went something like, I'm not going to betray him. I won't betray him. I won't betray him. I did this. I did this. I did this. I love him this much. And self-justifying their reasons for being great. So we know that their minds weren't focused on Jesus, and they were not focusing on their friend. They weren't focusing on being compassionate for their friend who needed them in his time of need. They're focusing on themselves and how they saw the new earthly kingdom they thought Jesus was going to bring. And so by the end of this, Jesus says, you can't follow me. And so this must have been a very stunning statement. For the last few years, Jesus had been their provision, their food, their direction, their source of teaching, their financial needs. And they were getting used to Jesus, I'm sure, as their provider and relying on him. And so now he had spoken of death before, but they were confused. They didn't understand that, why is Jesus leaving and why can't we come? This makes no sense. You chose us, Jesus. And we see that also in Peter's response. How could Jesus say that Peter would deny him 3 times? Peter was at the beginning. He was at the transfiguration. He is the man that Jesus is going to, I guess he will, affirm, and who will be the spokesperson in Acts, as he's basically helping build the church. And so they were confused because Jesus was saying and doing a lot of astonishing things here. And I think that the mood probably changed a lot from being excited, having the Passover meal celebration to the point of being terrified. But the point here is, as we are unpacking this context, and we're going to unpack more tomorrow, but the main point here is that God has a plan, and it's not always and not usually the plan that we think it is. But he has his own plan, and he's God. He can do whatever he wants. And so as we learn tomorrow, Jesus will say these astonishing things, but he doesn't leave them hanging. He says, you can't come with me, but he doesn't say that they're gone forever. Good luck. I did what I could. He doesn't leave them hanging. And so as we continue in chapter 14 tomorrow of what Jesus' response is to these confused and terrified disciples, we're going to look at the next part that leads up to our memory verses, the first couple verses of John 14. And we're going to learn how he begins to comfort his disciples. I just said God has a plan, and he does have a plan for everyone, for all of us. And that plan might not be what we want it to be. And it clearly wasn't what the disciples wanted. But we need to listen to Jesus and what he says and figure out if we are constantly wanting our own plan and praying for the things that we want, or if we're praying for God's plan. So that's the beginning of the context this week. And I want you to continue our memory verse memorization with reading it out loud, Write it on note cards, put it on your phone background. You can recite it with our memory verse podcast that we give out at the beginning of each week. It's about 15 to 20 seconds. It's really short. You can just put it on repeat in your car. If you wish to contact me, you can contact me at ideamailbag@gmail.com. That's ideamailbag@gmail.com. And remember to like, comment, rate, subscribe, review. If you could just do that, it takes about 10 seconds. So I'd really appreciate it. I hope this helps. It's fun to do. And I really enjoyed trying to memorize all these verses. All right, so we're going to go ahead and memorize or say out loud. We're going to memorize too, but we're going to say out loud this week's verse. And I'm going to say it twice. And I want you to say it the second time to get involved. So here we go. Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. No one comes to the Father except through me. All right. Great work today. And until next time, continue to put on the mind of Christ.